We're going to switch gears now and talk about big news coming out of the Tar Heel state, particularly when it comes to our recent elections. North Carolina Republicans are now looking for a new leader in the state Senate after longtime top GOP leader lost in a narrow primary race. He'd been the Senate president pro temp for 15 years and conceded last week after a recount, despite having President Trump's endorsement. Joining us today, we have with us from Elon University, Dr. Jason Husser, who is speaking to us about this. I mean, very, very big news here. Thank you so much for joining us as always this morning, Dr. Husser. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. Happy to talk about North Carolina politics. And in this case, the district we're talking about for this major state Senate shakeup is only a few miles from where I am on campus.
And so you're right there, Elon University, Burlington, North Carolina. Of course, here we're talking about State Senator Phil Berger there, who has now lost. He conceded just last week. He served in the NC State Senate since, 2000. He's been in leadership, though, since 2005, I believe. So what does this loss mean for North Carolina Republicans and then also for the political landscape there in the state?
Phil Berger's loss is a really big deal in North Carolina politics. It was in many ways the most expensive, most high attention, high profile state Senate race that anyone can remember in recent or even long past history in North Carolina. Living right on the edge of the district, we were inundated with ads all throughout the primary election cycle related to what was happening in that race. It was an idiosyncratic race in a lot of ways. It doesn't necessarily speak to a broader movement of the Republican Party. A lot of the fight in that race had to do with small town politics, about personalities, about a person who'd been representing a district for a really long time and had accumulated more enemies faster than he had picked up friends, and a really charismatic opponent in a local sheriff who was very well known. What are the implications next, though, is what happens in the North Carolina Senate now that Berger is no longer going to be the leader after this year. There's currently a couple of high-profile state senators jockeying to replace Berger. Some are doing so publicly, and I'm certain that there's some behind the scenes working it out. At the same time, the North Carolina Senate is about to go back in session next week. Berger is still at the helm. He is going to be shepherding a number of pieces of legislation through, including things like potential veto overrides on cooperation with ICE and a North Carolina concealed carry veto override that has been quite controversial and keeps being passed back and forth. It's going to take a while to find out what's going to happen next in the North Carolina Senate in terms of leadership, but I do expect we will see someone who's in a leadership role already emerging to fill Berger's shoes. But that's going to be really hard. Berger has been a titan in North Carolina politics for 15 years and in many ways has been the most important architect, along with Tom Tillis, of the Republican transformation of policy in the state.
And you mentioned there, Dr. Husser, Tom Tillis, and we're going to get to him in just a bit because we're going to look at who's going to take his seat there within the Senate. It's interesting with me, though, as we talk about this state Senate primary race. Berger lost after getting the endorsement from President Trump, who wrote a glowing endorsement for him. Now, both candidates in this race have received positive words from the president in recent months, and both of them have also touted their support of the president. So it's not, quite to where we have two candidates, one of them the president was speaking down about or vice versa. But should we read into President Trump's pick in this race not winning, and if so, how?
The writing had been on the wall for several years now that Phil Berger was potentially in trouble in his hometown, in his home area. In the 2024 race, Phil Berger underperformed President Trump in the district in a fairly marked way. I didn't notice it until after this primary, but there had been so much controversy in that district around things like potentially doing a land-based casino in North Carolina to counter the casino that was across the border in Virginia. That had really stirred up a lot of opposition, particularly among local churches. President Trump's endorsement certainly didn't hurt Berger. Berger did quite well in areas in Guilford County, the Greensboro area. Where he really floundered was in his hometown of Rockingham County, and that's where Page, who ultimately defeated Berger, is from. That's where he's the sheriff. So some of this is a bit more nuanced. President Trump's endorsement is meaningful, but it is not all powerful.
So, what does it say about the desires of the people of North Carolina? You kind of just said there, it looked like the writing was on the wall there for him. Should we learn or get anything from North Carolina voters, particularly those within the Republican Party, as we head towards this midterm election in November?
I don't know that this loss by Phil Berger, as shocking as it might be for a lot of insiders, really tells us too much about the state of the Republican Party. What it tells me is that being in a major leadership position for over a decade is a really hard thing to sustain. It's why we talk about folks like Nancy Pelosi being real historical outliers, sustaining that kind of leadership role for as long as they do. Berger had been in that role in many ways longer than what was typical. And when a person is in a role where they're balancing statewide sort of lobbying concerns, interest of the state as a whole with interest of a particular, particularly a rural district, it's a recipe for eventually making more enemies than friends. And I think that's what we saw in this race in North Carolina. It does, though, suggest to me that people are paying close attention in North Carolina elections. We're likely to have a very high turnout year ahead, particularly because we have this North Carolina District 1 race in the viewing area of this audience, as well as a U.S. Senate race, which both of those together could make meaningful differences about what happens in control of Congress.
That's a perfect segue, I think, into our next line of questioning here. Let's talk about those other big races that we're looking at ahead of the midterm. Let's start with the U.S. Senate race. Again, we said Tom Tillis is not running for re-election. The Republican will vacate his seat, and now you have two heavyweights that are going to be going at each other there to replace him in the Senate seat. We know who's going to be running in that race. Is there anything so far that gives us maybe an early indication about how that could wind up come November?
The hype around the North Carolina U.S. Senate race is that it's going to be the most expensive that anybody can remember. It's going to be hyper competitive. I'm not certain that's the case at this point. If we just look at the most recent primary election turnout levels, there are some indications that there's higher levels of enthusiasm around Democrats and their turnout. Early poll results are showing some advantage for former Governor Roy Cooper over Republican candidate Michael Whatley. Cooper is much better known in the state. He was governor for 8 years. He was attorney general for much longer than that and a high-profile state legislator before then. Whatley, on the other hand, has had major party roles. He's been leadership at both the national and state Republican Party, but he hasn't held political office in North Carolina. Whatley has a lot of ground to cover over Cooper in terms of name recognition and voters' familiarity with him. It's going to be a real test and challenge if he can do that. We might not end up seeing this race as competitive and big spending as some have thought if it turns out that Cooper is able to maintain the early lead that he currently has.
But certainly that's going to be a big one as we look at everything that's happening right now, even in the U.S. Senate. I mean, you imagine every single seat counts in the Senate and in the House. And let's talk about this District 1 race in the House there. Months after North Carolina leaders redrew the maps, particularly targeting that House district. As you said, it's in part of our viewing area in the northeast portion of North Carolina. Don Davis, congressman, is still in that seat, but those new maps, they lean towards Republicans. But we have a rematch in this case. So two kind of questions here. Same before, what are we seeing already? And with this race previously have been so tight, do we think that this could have a different result this time?
The District 1 race, which includes the North Carolina counties along the Virginia border on the eastern part of the state, was set up to be a hyper-competitive rematch without redistricting. It was set up that it was a district that President Trump won, but a Democrat, Don Davis, won the House seat. That's already a recipe that it makes it hard for a Democrat to retain a seat when they basically overperform their party in the area. Then Republicans in Raleigh tilted the map in such a way that it's now a seat that's not a slightly leaning Republican seat, but a pretty solidly leaning Republican seat, with estimates saying that it's potentially a 10-point lead towards Republicans. That does not in any way mean that it's impossible for Don Davis to win, but this rematch is no longer just a rematch. It's a rematch with a new ring in many ways. This is going to be one that gets a lot of attention because North Carolina's House delegation is currently split 10 Republicans to 4 Democrats. If this race goes to the Republican candidate, it could potentially flip that number to 11-3. That one vote out of 435 might not seem like much, but it's actually quite a big deal when we're talking about a very tightly disputed Congress. It could be the difference in Congress being controlled by Republicans or by Democrats. If the House tips towards Democrats, much of Trump's legislative agenda over the next 2 years is going to be really hard to pass.
I mean, we have our own fight even in Virginia right now, right? When you're looking at, several seats that Democrats in Virginia are trying to redraw in favor of Democrats after, what we've seen in North Carolina, after what we saw already take place in Texas. And so to your point there, Dr. Husser, yes, every seat in this kind of national battle can count when it comes to what goes on within this administration and in Congress, but specifically looking to maybe some of the trends that we've seen. Now, I'm sure Republicans feel very confident that they can edge this one out in the House district, but Don Davis, on his side, he said, listen, I'm still going to fight to keep this seat. With everything that's kind of been changing here when we saw in Virginia and in New Jersey with Democrats really taking major swings, do we think that District 1 House seat is as sure fit for Republicans as they may think it could be?
The map is going to be really hard for the Democrat Don Davis, the incumbent, to retain the seat. However, Davis has a few things going in his favor. One, he's an incumbent. People know him. They voted for him already. He's been able to deliver some things to the district that he can point to as real successes and wins. Another is that it's a midterm election in which the economy is on shaky ground by many measures. That's usually bad news for the incumbent president's party. President Trump, being a Republican, is in a situation where odds are, if we just take the 100-year-plus historical record of midterm elections, Republicans are going to lose some seats. That is not always the case. There's some outliers to that, such as George W. Bush, when at the height of his popularity, picks up some seats in midterm elections. But usually presidents' parties don't do better. There's usually wins against the incumbent party. So that's helpful for Davis. We also could potentially see Davis getting some votes from people who are going to vote for Roy Cooper, a very well-known, very popular ex-governor in the Senate race. And we could see some people who are frustrated about how that redistricting process worked out last fall, which really shaked the map up for really explicitly political reasons, not trying to have any kind of mirage about fairness, basically saying we're redrawing this map to make it better for Republicans.
Yeah, certainly we're still months away from that midterm, and anything can really happen within that time frame. But as you said, there are a lot of other factors that are happening both nationally, statewide, and then internationally, even with the war with Iran and the impact on gas prices we've seen in the economy, that probably a lot of voters will consider one way or the other when they head to the polls come November, particularly if those things are still going at that point. One of my last questions to you here just is, what are some of the other things that you're watching? I tend to want to lean into the wisdom of our experts who come in here on our broadcast, but what are some of the other things that you think voters and North Carolinians should really kind of focus in on and watch closely as we get closer and closer to November?
I'm watching the same trends in North Carolina. The analysts in Virginia and other parts of the country are watching closely, which are really these big macroeconomic indicators. How's the stock market doing? What's the unemployment rate looking like? What's GDP growth looking like? Gas prices are certainly an important thing right now as we're all feeling that pain at the pump. But beyond gas prices, the general increase in cost of logistics and fuel is a particularly big issue in a state like North Carolina that's highly reliant on ports like we have in Wilmington, distribution along our interstate systems, much of which are flowing through Virginia or down to Georgia. And a state that is a really an export-driven economy in many sorts of ways. We have a level of uncertainty right now in international markets, which I think could really shape this race in ways no one can anticipate or predict over the next few months.
And I'll tell you this, big things though, when you're considering the impact that North Carolina has, if you, as you said, could have on the U.S. Senate, U.S. House and the Senate, but also just in general. I just got this in while you were talking, seeing that Governor Josh Stein just released a statement saying the newest data from the U.S. Census Bureau is in North Carolina's growing, saying that more people moving to North Carolina from other states than any other state, saying that that the fastest growing counties in North Carolina, Brunswick, Pender, Johnston, Franklin, and then Wake and Mecklenburg, which has Charlotte, had population gains in the top 7 nationally. So, I mean, North Carolina is making big gains and right now is making big news on the political landscape. So we appreciate you as always, Dr. Husser, for making time and joining us here on the show from my alma mater, Elon University.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you as always.
Absolutely. Okay, take care. We'll definitely have to bring you back sometime soon. Appreciate you. Thank you. So there you have it from him. Glad to have him come on. North Carolina, like Virginia, there are going to be a lot of eyes that are going to be in on both of these states for different reasons, right? We know April 21st is going to be the big referendum that takes place here in the Commonwealth, as voters will head to the polls to figure out whether or not they agree or not with the lawmakers here within Virginia changing our congressional maps. And then, of course, that will be ahead of those November midterms, in which could determine, as you heard there from Dr. Husser, and we've been reporting, what happens in Congress, what happens in the House, who will have control in the House. That major push right now from both parties to try to finagle more seats within the U.S. House, and what that can mean for policy, what that can mean for this administration, and what that can mean just in general from the effectiveness of Congress and how they move. Of course, this all coming as right now, Congress still in a stalemate on that partial government shutdown, days after the Senate decided it was going to pass a bipartisan plan to fund most of the Department of Homeland Security, which includes TSA. They sent that to the House, and the House said no. That was blocked by House Republicans, and so it is not going to the president's desk. And so now we are still in a partial government shutdown, though the president has ordered for funding to be directed to TSA agents, funding that was appropriated originally through what they had once called the Big Beautiful Bill. But still, that leaves questions as to, how can the president do that? Is he allowed to? Those kind of things. We've seen it kind of happen last year during the longest running full government shutdown, in which he directed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to give funding to our troops and our troops and military personnel during that shutdown. But, again, here we are. TSA agents will be paid, but the government not fully funded still. So that stalemate continues as the fight over what to happen with DHS and ICE maintains in our Congress.